Good afternoon, dear Professor Dr. Dana ZEIDLER, and good evening, dear audience. I am Associate Professor Dr. Dilek Karışan-Korucu in Faculty of Education at University of Adnan Menderes. Today, Dr. Dana ZEIDLER and I are here to discuss the current research trends in socio-scientific issues. The speech will be in English, however, Mr. Saraç is here to translate the general points of the speech from time to time. İyi günler Sayın Profesör ZEIDLER ve iyi akşamlar sevgili dinleyicilerimiz. Bu akşam ben Doçent Doktor Dilek Karışan-Korucu, Aydın Adnan Menderes Üniversitesi Eğitim Fakültesi öğretim üyesiyim. Bu akşam Dana ZEIDLER ve ben sizlerle sosyobilimsel konularda güncel araştırma eğilimlerini tartışmak için buradayız. Konuşmamız genel hatlarıyla İngilizce olacaktır ancak öğretim üyelerimizden Mr. Saraç bizlerle konuşmanın genel hatlarını Türkçe'ye çevirmek için burada. When we announced the webinar, I got very good feedback from the different professors across Turkey. So many people appreciated the organization, and there are numerous researchers from different provinces of Turkey who are here right now. I would like to say welcome to all of them, and also I would like to say hello to our graduate students, undergraduate and PhD students, and of course, in-service science teachers. Welcome. I'm so happy to see you here. And lastly, I would like to thank Mr. Dr. Dana ZEIDLER once again in your presence for accepting our invitation. Bu web seminerini duyurduğumuzda Türkiye'nin çapındaki hocalardan çok fazla geri dönüt aldım. Çok güzel, olumlu dönüşler aldım. Türkiye'nin farklı illerinden birçok akademisyenin şu an burada bizleri izlediğini, dinlediğini biliyorum. Hepinize hoş geldiniz demek istiyorum. Aynı zamanda lisans öğrencilerimiz, yüksek lisans öğrencilerimiz, doktor öğrencilerimiz ve alanda görev yapmakta olan fen lisesi öğretmenlerimize de canı gönülden merhaba diyorum. Sizleri burada gördüğüm için çok mutluyum. Ve tabii ki bizleri bir araya getiren, bu geniş yelpazeyi bir araya toplayan Dr. Dana ZEIDLER'a da huzurlarınızda bir kez daha teşekkür etmek istedim davetinizi kabul ettiği için. I'm sure our audience knows Professor ZEIDLER well from the SSI literature. Indeed, some of you may know him in person. I'm also one of those lucky people who had a chance to work with him at University of South Florida during my PhD education. Still, I would like to briefly mention his short biography. Birçoğunuzun Profesör Dr. Dana ZEIDLER'ı literatürden bildiğini düşünüyorum. Hatta bazılarınızın da onunla yüz yüze tanışma fırsatına eriştiğinizi biliyorum. Ben de onunla yüz yüze tanışma fırsatına erişen şanslı kişilerdenim. Doktor eğitimimin bir kısmında University of South Florida'da kendisiyle birlikte çalışma fırsatı bulmuştuk. Onu tanıdığınızı biliyorum ancak yine de kısaca biyografisinden bahsetmek isterim. Dana ZEIDLER is a distinguished university professor of science education in the College of Education at the University of South Florida. He has developed an international research program in the field of science education centered on socio-scientific issues, taking a sociocultural perspective approach to teaching and learning about how moral and ethical issues can be a means to foster the formation of epistemological sophistication and character in the pursuit of scientific literacy. Accordingly, his works incorporate aspects of argumentation and discourse, moral reasoning and character formation, epistemology, place-based immersive scenarios, and the nature of science. His work has been cited over 11,600 times in the international literature. His H index is 42 and his I10 index is 71. Profesör ZEIDLER, Güney Florida Üniversitesi Eğitim Fakültesi Fen Eğitimi bölümünde ordinarius profesör olarak görev yapmaktadır. Fen eğitim alanında sosyobilimsel konular üzerine uluslararası bir araştırma programı geliştirmiştir. Program, bilim okuryazarı bireyler yetiştirirken ahlaki ve etik konuları araç olarak kullanmanın önemine vurgu yapmakta ve aynı zamanda bu konuların epistemolojik inanışları ve karakter gelişimine katkılarına odaklanmaktadır. Dr. ZEIDLER'ın uzmanlık alanları argümantasyon ve söylem, ahlaki akıl yürütme ve karakter oluşumu, epistemoloji, mekana dayalı sürükleyici senaryolar ve bilimin doğası üzerinedir. Çalışmaları literatürde alan yazında 11.600 kez atıf almıştır. Kendisinin H indeksi 42, I10 indeksi ise 71'dir. Dr. ZEIDLER has authored over 115 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters, presented over 325 conference papers, workshops, and lectures, served as editor for 60 scholarly books for the Springer series, supervised and mentored 60 doctoral students, and has given keynote addresses and international talks in Australia, Canada, China, Hong Kong, France, Germany, India, Ireland, the Netherlands, Norway, Slovenia, South Korea, Sweden, Taiwan, Turkey, United Kingdom, and United States on aspects of his research program and related topics in science education. Dr. ZEIDLER'ın 115'in üzerinde hakemli dergi makalesi ve kitap bölümü vardır. 325'in üzerinde konferansta konuşmacı olarak yer almıştır. Springer Yayın Evi'nden çıkan 16 kitapta editörlük yapmıştır. 60'ın üzerinde de doktor öğrencisine danışmanlık yürütmüştür. Kendisinin Avustralya, Kanada, Çin, Hong Kong, Fransa, Almanya, Hindistan, İrlanda, Hollanda, Norveç, Slovenya, Güney Kore, İsveç, Tayvan, Türkiye ve Birleşik Krallık başta olmak üzere birçok ülkede davetli konuşmacı olarak yer almış ve çalışmalarını sunmuştur. Professor ZEIDLER''s recent distinctions include serving as co-editor of Journal of Research in Science Teaching, receiving the Distinguished Career Awards from a worldwide organization for improving science teaching and learning through research, NARSTA, and being past president of NARSTA, Distinguished Visiting Professor of Science Education, Eva Bowman University, South Korea, and Honorary Professor of Science Education and Environmental Studies at the same university, and the Hong Kong Institute of Education, the University of Hong Kong, and Honorary Professor of Science Education at Being Normal University. Dr. ZEIDLER closely works with doctoral students, international scholars, and other leaders in the field. Profesör ZEIDLER'ın son dönemdeki üstün başarıları arasında Journal of Research in Science Teaching'de eş editörlük yapmak, yine dünya çapında bir organizasyon olan, fen eğitiminin köklü kongrelerinden olan NARS'ta başkanlık yapmak, NARS Bilim Kurulu üyeleri tarafından seçkin kariyer ödülüne layık görülmek üst üste, Güney Kore Seul'de bulunan Women Eva Üniversitede Bilim Eğitimi bölümünün değerli konuk profesörü olmak, aynı üniversitede bilim ve çevre çalışmaları onursal profesörü olmak, Hong Kong Eğitim Enstitüsü, Hong Kong Üniversitesi ve Pekin Normal Üniversitesi'nde fen eğitimi fahri profesörü olmak gibi önemli görevleri vardır. Dr. ZEIDLER'ın doktora öğrencileriyle, uluslararası akademisyenlerle ve alandaki diğer liderlerle de yakın çalışmaları vardır. In today's webinar, we will talk about some of the conceptual framework, current trends, and applications of socio-scientific issues. There will be a question and answer event at the end of the webinar. If you have any question or want to greet ZEIDLER, you are kindly requested to write in that chat box. Bugünkü seminerde sosyobilimsel konuların kavramsal çerçevesi, güncel eğilimler ve uygulamaları konularına yer vereceğiz. Seminerin sonunda soru-cevap etkinliği yapılacaktır. Sorularınız varsa ya da ZEIDLER'a selam vermek isterseniz sohbet kutucuğuna yazmanız önemli rica olunur. Professor ZEIDLER, it's your turn to speak.
Well, thank you for that very nice introduction. And it's wonderful to be here with you. I know you can see the title of the slide. And I'd like to do something a little different. Tell you a little bit about that into this. Share a little current research, and take you on a pictorial tour of students really engaged in this kind of work that we do here. Before I do that, I'd just like to give a special thanks to Dr. Dilek Karasen, who organized this whole session and is the moderator, and for Mr. Sarek, that's going to serve as our translator. And thank you for IT work of Abdu, because without all these people, we couldn't do this at all. And I just also wanted to share with you, and go back one slide. I know it's good evening where you are from sunny Florida, although it seems to be raining out right now, but it's usually sunny here. And the best thing about this job is meeting interesting people all over the world. I've been to your country at least 3 times. I've worked with a lot of individuals, a lot of students. It's been a wonderful experience. And without their help and support, this research program wouldn't be nearly what it is today. And I just wanted to point out 2 things to you. If you're really interested in wanting to get into understanding the conceptual framework of SSI in more detail, I would recommend the chapter on top that's in the Handbook of Research in Science Education, because I think I spend a pretty good amount of time explaining the whole theoretical framework for SSI. This is something that if you don't have access to it, I can easily send to Dr. Karasen, the PDF. She probably has this work already, and be happy to share it with you. And I want to point out also that my good friend Norm Letterman is someone you may have heard about. He's very well known all over the world in the nature of science. Unfortunately, he passed away weeks ago or so. And we're putting out another handbook, a third volume of research in science education. My good friend Norm's name will still be on it. And the editors for that book will be Norm Letterman, myself, and Judy Letterman, his wife. And we expect a updated chapter for new research on SSI. This one will be done by Zeidler and Sadler, another colleague of mine and former doctoral student. And we'll be looking at all the reporting to the current. And I can tell you that in that frame of time, there have been over 500 or 600 studies on SSI just in that time span alone, that include articles, dissertations, book chapters, and the like. So we'll be on the lookout for that in the future. And I wanted to spend just a moment talking about the serendipity of socioscientific issues. And that's a word that's hard to maybe translate. And I look at this word in English as kind of a happy knack or propensity for making unexpected and delightful discoveries. And sometimes they're by accident too. But the important thing here is that I look at serendipity of a gift of finding. And through the work in SSI, I think that teachers and students can look at this as a gift of finding unexpected value in the lessons that they teach and in the thoughts that they create for themselves. And a lot of times when you're looking for something, if you have the right frame of mind, you'll see other things that are pleasant discoveries along the way. And that kind of sums up a lot of the SSI research program. It's a discovery made in our research that we do and in the teaching that we do because the individual is mentally equipped not to disregard or ignore something that's new or strange. And it's a type of discovery that we make as we're on the quest of a different goal. We make a new discovery that we didn't anticipate that would happen. We find that to be true in a lot of the SSI teaching and pedagogy that we do. And the fact that such discoveries come with a sense of happiness and delight, both on the part of teachers and on the part of students, touches on the emotive nature of the act in SSI. So I'll pause there.
Profesör Zeidler teşekkürler. Değerli konuklar, öncelikle katılımınız için teşekkür ediyoruz. Ve perspektifleri bu noktada, bu sunumda odaklanmayı planlıyoruz. Özellikle Dilek Karışan Hoca'ya ve ekibine teşekkür ediyoruz. Bu süreç içerisinde projeler kapsamında ayrıca teşekkürlerimi sunmak isterim. Linkte belirtilen, 4. slaytta belirtilen kitaplar gerçekten alanla ilgili önemli bilgiler içermektedir. Bunların ilkinin özellikle PDF versiyonu dilediğiniz takdirde gönderebilirim. Diğer kitapta Lederman'ın ki 6 hafta önce kaybettiğimiz değerli bir bilim insanıdır. Onunla birlikte oluşturulan bir kaynak kitap. Bu felsefenin altında aslında tesadüfler ya da sosyobilimsel meselelerde tesadüflerin ne kadar önemli olduğuyla bir vurgulama yapılması gerekiyor. Özellikle bazı buluşların kaza yoluyla beklenmedik bir şekilde ama mutlu bir şekilde keşfedildiği durumlardan bahsetmemiz gerekiyor. Bunu bir hüner olarak kabul edebiliriz. Bir hünerden bahsediyoruz ama nasıl bir hüner? Tesadüflerle, kazara tespit edilen ve kazara tespit ettiğimiz, elde ettiğimiz hünerler. Evet, sosyobilimsel meselelerde bu iki kavramdan özellikle belirtmemiz gerekiyor. Bunlar da, bu buluşlarda, kazara ulaşılan bu buluşlarda doğal olarak bir memnuniyet ve mutluluk hissi yaratmaktadır. Bunlarla, bu duygularla birlikte gelmektedir ve doğal olarak davranışlarımızdaki duygusal o duygusal ortamada yansımaktadır. Over to you, Professor Zeidler.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a background of how this whole research program on SSI came about. And to do that, and to think about the idea of serendipity, of unexpected surprises, I have to take you back to high school. And this is me. I'm old enough to have been in high school in 1972. And I was your typical high school student. Well, let me correct that. I probably wasn't your typical high school student. I was probably your below average high school student. I was having a good time in high school. And some things happened to me my senior year that I think would leave its mark on me and change my trajectory of what happened in education. So back in 1972, it was during the Vietnam War. There were a lot of protests that were going on. And there was a kind of a disturbance, a miniature riot, if you will, at my high school. And I saw the police that were hurting some students. And being me and being 18 years old, I tried to intervene to help the students who were being hurt. And as a result, I was arrested as well. So this wasn't on my vita. You're not going to find it among my publications. But that experience began to give me a sense of social justice, of moral indignation, of what it means to have people in authority to lie under oath. And I think that experience left its mark on me. So as I progressed in my education, I still had this predisposition to wonder about social justice and morality. And it wouldn't be realized for some time later. So you can see my trajectory of academics going through the usual science degrees and my undergraduate work, and then on for a master's degree and PhD in science education at Syracuse University. But during that time in my graduate work, I had a lot of coursework in the history, philosophy, and sociology of education and developmental psychology in my science education program. And a lot of that was influenced by Thomas F. Green, one of my mentors. And along the same time, I became introduced to the moral developmental framework of Larry Kohlberg and his ideas about moral development, and Marvin Berkowitz of character education. And in '79, I taught the first bioethics course ever to be taught at Syracuse University, but I taught it at a jail, a prison, a correctional facility in upstate New York, which I'll talk about in just a minute. And I also taught middle school and finished up my dissertation. And the title of that dissertation was Identifying Mediating Factors of Moral Reasoning in Science Education. So that was the precursor, the beginning of the SSI framework. And within that dissertation, I had stated that it is of pedagogical importance for educators to know what factors above and beyond intellectual development contribute to how one reasons about different moral problems. Because back then, the emphasis was on cognitive development, Piagetian stage development. But I thought that since moral and ethical issues are embedded in culture and science, that we need to understand how people think and reason about value judgments and moral dilemmas, and not just pay attention to the cognitive domain, but pay attention to the affective domain. And so I don't think I would have gotten here, and I don't think anybody who has their PhD would have gotten to where they are without the help of certain professors. So Thomas F. Green was one of my main mentors at Syracuse, and Larry Kohlberg from Harvard University was another influential person in my life where I studied moral development with him. And I also want to tell you that anybody that has a successful research program doesn't do it alone. We rely on good friends, good colleagues, our graduate students, and all these different people contribute to one's success. And I can go on and name dozens and dozens of students that have helped my research program by being interested in it and willing to do a lot of the legwork as well too. So I couldn't have gotten to this point without the help of dozens and dozens and dozens of colleagues and students throughout my career.
Evet, her şeyin bir başlangıç noktası olduğu gibi bu felsefenin de hayatımda önemli olan bir yerde başladığını söylemeliyim. Bu 1972 yılında lise dönemine aslında tekabül ediyor. O dönemler Vietnam savaşları var ve büyük oranda insanların protestoları ve hak arayış çabaları veya ahlaki değerlerle ilgili başkaldırış dönemleri var. Ve orada polislerin zarar vermeye çalıştığı gençlere yardım ederken ben de olayların içinde kaldım ve tutuklandım. Aslında her şey bununla başladı. Böyle bir eğilim oluştu aslında. Yani daha sonra mutlu bitecek bir tesadüf gelmişti. Sosyal adaletle ilgili bir deneyim oldu bu. Bu nedenle artık bu durumu, bu eğilimi merak etmeye başladım ve bununla ilgili de artık adım atmaya başladım. Aslında bu felsefenin çıkış noktası teknik olarak bu olaydı. Daha sonra 1974 yılında State Üniversitesi New York, 76'da yine New York State Üniversitesi, Syracuse Üniversitesi yine 78'de 82'de çalışmalar devam etti. Ancak bu sürecin, bu felsefenin ahlaki temelleriyle ilgili olan asıl çalışmalar 1976 yılında 78, 79, 80 ve 82 yılındaki süreçlerle ve çalışmalarla devam etti. Ve sonuç olarak vardığım nokta temel pedagojik bir öneminin olması gerektiğiydi. Özellikle entelektüel gelişim ve bu entelektüel gelişimin ahlaki problemlere eğilmesinin ayrıca pedagojik bir öneminin olduğunu yattı. Eğitimciler daha sonrasında tabii ki bu şartları daha da geliştirerek, genişleterek öğrencilerine bir fırsat olarak sunmalıydı. Bu ahlaki faktörlerin veya ahlaki durumların öğrenciler açısından da değerlendirilmesi ve onların ahlaki ideolojilerinin de aynı zamanda değerlendirilmesi gerekiyordu. Bu noktada Thomas Green ve Larry Kohlberg çok önemli bilim insanları. Onlardan çok etkilendim. Aynı zamanda bu süreçte tabii ki tek başıma değildim. Çok yardımsever ve birlikte çalışmayı seven araştırma ekibi vardı. Ve tabii ki öğrencimle beraber bu süreci yürüttüm. Professor Zeidler, over to you.
Thank you again. So this is a picture of Syracuse University, part of it. It's a very beautiful, idyllic campus, and a picture of my first teaching job in middle and high school on the bottom. And during this time, I would begin to try out some different types of moral dilemma science classes. What was really interesting, and this may be hard to understand and hard to really translate, is that I also had a teaching assistantship, not only for Syracuse University on the main campus, but I took a teaching assistantship that taught classes in a maximum security prison or jail in upstate New York. It was called Auburn Correctional Facility. And it was again, maximum security prison. And I was teaching a general biology course of all things within the prison and a course in applied bioethics. And in that, I began to experiment with a democratic, participatory approach to science education. We would have argumentation and trying to use supporting evidence. And the prisoners in this facility who were my students, we were talking about different types of dilemmas, like can prisoners consent to chemical castration for time taken off their sentence? Can there ever be free and informed consent in a system that's inherently restrictive? what about active versus passive euthanasia? So we're looking at principles of meta-ethics, normative ethics, deontology, utilitarianism, but doing this within the middle of a prison system. And it was really an incredible experience for me to think about what really mattered to people and how to engage them in dialogue and discourse and learn. And as a result, some of the people selected into the program I taught in this prison were earning college university credit hours for taking these courses. So let me move into what SSI is, and maybe most of you probably know this, but socio-scientific issues by nature are ill-structured, controversial problems that are going to require evidence-based reasoning. We used scientific topics that require students to engage in discourse and dialogue and debate and argumentation. And for me, it needs to have, at the very least, an implicit, but better yet, an explicit ethical component, and require some level of moral reasoning as you think your way through these contextualized problems. And also for me, the long-range goal is the formation of virtue and character, and that's often associated with SSI. So the underlying premise is that relationships among people, between people, lie at the heart of the learning process and are fundamental to improving developmental and socio-moral outcomes for all students. So we try to provide this systemic experience that contextualizes learning for students. We refer to this as science in context, and you may see that phrase, science in context, in the research literature in science education. And the underlying values in SSI I have taken from basically Aristotle and the Greeks, and they connect to eudaimonia, which is a type of human flourishing, phronesis, which is practical wisdom in action. We refer to that, or Aristotle referred to that, as moral intelligence, and arete, another Greek word, which is a type of civic virtue based on excellence in fulfilling one's own potential. So if you're in school and you're not doing the best you can, you're not fulfilling your potential. You know, the arete would not be as strong as it could be. It doesn't mean you have to get all A's, for example. It just means you have to try your very best. And sometimes we fall short of the mark. We don't always make it. But if we're just lazy and unwilling to engage in serious dialogue and discourse and study, then we're not fulfilling our potential. So under the SSI framework, we justify our moral actions through discussion, rhetoric, argumentation. And we try to unmask this myth of science, this bifurcation of science, the fiction myth. So typically, if you ask most science teachers, university professors, what science entails, they'll describe the non-normative components. So if you ask someone, well, what do you do in science? And they'll say, well, you know, we gather data, right? We make observations, we make predictions, we measure things, we make inferences. All those sorts of things are the non-normative components, and we would call them scientific process skills. And that's certainly important, and it's certainly what we do. But on the other hand, there are these normative components of science as well, in which one can prescribe courses of action. What ought we do? What should we do? How do we choose among competing alternatives? How do we select products that we buy? How do we take different when it comes to an issue? And so all those things that are listed are these normative components that don't often get discussed within a science course. And I think that this distinction between the non-normative and normative components is a misconception. It's a myth. And I think when it's dangerous to have that distinction, because I see science as being both things together, because when you have split it apart, it leads to an abdication of any sense of responsibility. I just do my science. I don't worry about the ethical effects in here. So scientific literacy within the SSI framework, as I envision it and as I've argued, requires a moral compass. Literacy may not require a moral compass, but scientific literacy in the sense that I'm suggesting does. And that's when I began to use the term functional scientific literacy in my research to emphasize normative components as well. So in scientific literacy, we're concerned about character considerations as well. And so our argument is that by participating in carefully designed and socially responsible activities, students can develop and reinforce such qualities of virtue like reliability, trustworthiness, dependability, empathy, compassion. And I would argue that these are important outcomes in education, and as important or more important than any other measurable outcomes that you might have with respect to performance on a scientific content exam or test. So the kind of things that we will ask students a lot in our research and in our teaching are different types of probes that may be justification probes. Like if you had to convince your friend that your view is right, what evidence or proof would you say or show to them to persuade that person? Could the other person ever prove that you're wrong with your point of view? Why or why not? So these types of probes are to generate alternative frameworks for the student and to begin to experience a degree of perspective taking. I'll pause there once again so you can unpack this a little bit.
Thank you very much Professor ZEIDLER. Bu felsefenin yine oluşması ile ilgili Syracuse Üniversitesi'ni ayrıca tabii ki belirtmemiz gerekiyor. Ve özellikle Auburn hapishanesi. Burada asistan öğretmen olarak görev yaptım hapishanede ve oradaki mahkumlar öğrencilerimdi. Doğal olarak onlarla eğitim öğretim süreçleri içerisinde yer alırken birçok farklı şansım oldu. Özellikle oradaki hapishanenin işleyişinden başlayarak genel olarak suçlar ya da suçların sebepleri, suçların nedenleriyle ilgili. Bu benim için fantastik, harika bir deneyim oldu. Özellikle meslek hayatında. Bu kişilerin nasıl hayata katılmasıyla ilgili, eğitim öğretim süreçlerine nasıl hayata katılmasıyla ilgili özellikle düşünceler içerisinde oldum. Peki sosyobilimsel meseleler nelerdir? Bunlar daha çok kesinlikle tartışmalı meselelerdir. Doğası gereği tartışmalı meselelerdir. Özellikle oluşumlarında çok böyle netlik veya görüş hakkında görüş bildirilirken özellikle çok net yerlere gidilemez. Ve kesinlikle kanıt odaklı akıl yürütme yollarının kullanılması gerekmektedir. Bunun dışında bilimsel konuların müzakereci bir yolla kullanılması veya ulaşılması, öğrencilerin diyaloglarla ya da tartışmalara katılarak desteklenmesi ve öğrencilerin bu süreçlere özellikle katılması gerekmektedir. Ayrıca açık bir şekilde ya da üstü kapalı bir şekilde etik elemanların, etik değerlerin aynı şekilde sosyobilimsel meseleler içerisinde veya eğitim öğretim süreçleri içerisinde verilmesi gerekir. Özellikle ahlaki akıl yürütme derecesi öğrencinin önemli görülmektedir. Sosyobilimsel meselelerde peki pedagojik hedef nedir? Kesinlikle entelektüel, sosyal ve mümkünse fiziksel olarak da akademik deneyimleri yaşayabilen ya da o öğrenme konusu için deneyim elde edebileceğini sağlayabileceğimiz, öğrencilerin deneyim elde edebileceğini sağlayabileceğimiz kesinlikle temel, felsefenin temeli olarak görebiliriz. Öğrenme süreci bu noktada çok önemli. Hem tüm öğrenciler için hem gelişimsel süreçler önemli hem de sosyo-ahlaki çıktılara ulaşmamız çok önemli. Bu noktada sosyobilimsel meselelerle ilgili Yunanca bazı terimler kullandım. Bunlardan ilki eudaimonia, insan geliştirme ile ilgili. Bunun dışında pratik akıl yürütme, eylemlerde buna ahlaki zeka diyebiliriz. Arete, bu da yine kentle ilgili bir kişinin potansiyelini gerçekleştirmesine yönelik bir terim olarak kullanıldı. Burada sosyobilimsel meselelerde gerçek olandan değere doğru iki kollu bir oktan bahsediliyor. İkilemli, bilimin ikilem yaratan tarafına odaklanılmasıyla ilgili iki ayrım var. Normatif olmayan elemanlarda doğal olarak çok bilindik ve tahmin edilebilir veri toplama, gözlem yapma, tahmin etme, bilimsel metotları kullanma, ölçme, çıkarımda bulunma, sonuca ulaşma gibi elemanlardan bahsedilirken artık normatif elemanlara baktığımızda artık o eylemin süreçlerini tanımlama veya süreçleriyle ilgili betimlemeler yapma, bir ürünü seçme, alınması gereken kararlarla ilgili yorumlarda bulunma, çoklu perspektiflere odaklanabilme ve düşünebilme, sosyal ya da adil meselelerle ilgili, adaletle ilgili meselelerle ilgili düşünceler beyan edebilme gibi konulara eğilmek gerekiyor. Bu nedenle aslında okuryazarlık belki de ahlaki bir pusula sunmuyor olabilir bize ama ben burada söylüyorum ki bilimsel okuryazarlıkta bu anlamıyla ben bazı şeyleri pusula olarak sunacağım. Professor ZEIDLER'ın, go on.
Thank you once again. Current research that we've been working on, and then I promise you we're going to have a fun time going for a ride, a journey, and discover some serendipity along the way of things we've been doing with students. But for right now, let me just mention a few things about the SSI framework, and more specifically talking about Socio-Synaptic Reasoning. So one of my colleagues, Troy Sadler, has worked with this construct for some time, and we've worked with him. And so the kinds of reasoning is unique when you and we refer to as SSR, Socio-Synaptic Reasoning. And that consists of complexity, being able to realize the inherent complexity of SSI, how the issues are interconnected, intertwined, inquiry, that a sense of investigation is needed to be able to uncover a lot of information about a particular subject. Perspective taking, one of the more important ones that we do a lot of research on, that you need to look at possible solutions to different problems from the perspective of different stakeholders, people that have different points of view, having a degree of skepticism, that you look at information carefully, you just don't accept it at the first blush, and understanding the affordances and limitations of science, determining how science can contribute to the resolution of moral problems, and know at what point they may not be able to do that. So the three conditions for me, for us in our research, that are necessary and sufficient for good socio-synaptic reasoning to occur is, first, you need to have engagement. The students, like any subject in any lesson, need to have some level of engagement in what they're learning. And to do that, they need to be able to perceive a sense of personal or community or of global significance to the problem that you're studying. And that has to connect to the virtues that the students hold to themselves. There needs to be, secondly, an etic to emic shift in perspective taking. And students need practice in doing this. That is, that we need to be able to take the student from an outsider perspective as they look at a problem and move them to the perspective of the other people, the other stakeholders that have their own perceptions of the problem. And this connecting back and forth, this edict to emic shifts that go back and forth and flow back and forth is extremely important to facilitate perspective taking, or what we refer to in our later research as socio-scientific perspective taking. And the third is that there needs to be a moral context for these issues. It needs to be embedded in the consideration of ethical principles and moral values. And when you have those three elements, then you can get students to really perform well and develop their socio-scientific reasoning, to develop their socio-scientific perspective taking. So this is just another graphical representation of some of the main elements where we try to embed, my mouse isn't quite working the way, there we go, the SSI in a moral context. We're going to use rational thinking, but we are going to use emotive thinking and empathy and intuitive skills as well as students perform reflective judgment. And we have this engagement, these edict to emic shifts, and all these contribute to socio-scientific reasoning. So all those elements I just described on the first page need to be present to develop a sense of conscience. This is probably more confusing than it needs to be, but it's really just simply showing on the epistemological sophistication of students, their socio-scientific reasoning can begin to go up. So at first, things that students reason about might be based on more tangible or proximal connections to their own lives. But as their sophistication improves, where they can begin to look at intangibles, look at other people's perspectives, look at the effects of an issue that are long-term effects, for example, that are more delayed, they can reason more abstractly. So as one increases, their SSR, socio-scientific reasoning, increases. And this is what our research is basically have shown. I'll skip over that for the sake of time and just mention that the types of character considerations I've mentioned before, by developing these types of SSI, these moral dilemmas that are entrenched in science, students will hopefully develop reliability, trustworthiness, dependability, altruism, compassion, care. Those sorts of things are important to us in the research that we do and in the teaching that we do. In terms of the research, it's too much. Again, I mentioned that since 2014 to the present, there have been between 500 and 600 studies on SSI alone. But I can tell you from my own work that I've done with my colleagues that we have both statistical and practical significance with respect to implementing SSI in classroom settings or informal place settings where we can increase the reflective judgment of students, we can increase their sense of empathy and caring, we can elevate their argumentation skills and discourse, we can increase their understanding of the nature of science. We can also learn science better and transfer that science from one situation to another. So all these are outcomes: moral reasoning, character development, developing more robust ecological worldviews, having a better sense of socio-scientific accountability and social moral compassion. We found these outcomes in both elementary school, middle school, and high school and college as well. So our collective body of research demonstrates these outcomes. It's up to you to look at the research and decide and judge for yourself if you think our claims are valid and reliable by looking at the design and methodology. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Professor Zeidler. Evet, SSR olarak kısaltmasını yapabileceğimiz bu akıl yürütme için şartlar nelerdir? Bu şartlarla ilgili 3 ana terim ortaya çıkmaktadır, karşımıza çıkmaktadır. Birincisi öğrencinin katılım. İkincisi farklı bakış açılarına gidiş gelişler diyebiliriz. Öğrenciyi veya bireyi mevcut inandığı bakış açısından farklı bir yöne de aynı zamanda kaydırıp tekrar kendi yönüne tekrar geri getirmekle ilgili bir bakış açısı değişiminden bahsedebiliriz. Diğeri de ahlaki konteks söylenebilir. Tabii bununla ilgili bireyin farklı düşüncelere veya farklı akıl yürütme daha kompleks yapılara ulaşmayla ilgili becerisinden bahsedilmeli. Aynı zamanda aynı zamanda meseleleri analiz etme ya da potansiyel çözümleriyle ilgili bazı görüşlere veya düşüncelere ulaşabilme ve diğer paydaşların da analizini alabilme becerisinden bahsedebiliriz. Şüphecilikten burada bahsetmeliyiz. Aynı zamanda tabii ki bilimin sınırlılıklarından ve bilimsel bilginin ve bilimsel süreçlerin SSI için ne derece önemli olduğunu da vurgulamamız gerekiyor. Bununla ilgili SSPT'nin SSR'la ilişkisini gösteren grafik öne çıkmaktadır. Bu grafikte sosyobilimsel akıl yürütmede şüphecilik, araştırma ve karmaşıklılık öğeleri ön plana çıkarken diğer tarafta ahlaki bir konteks, rastsal bir yön veya adım atmayla ilgili bazı terimler karşımıza çıkıyor. Tabii ki bireyin aktif katılımı ve etik olarak bireyin düşüncelerinin farklı şekilde farklı düşünmesini sağlanması ve tekrar kendi düşüncesine dönmesi, bu değişimlere sahip olması gerekmektedir. Bu noktada yine epistemolojik akıl yürütme, düşünce ve sosyobilimsel akıl yürütmenin ilişkisini gösteren o eşik modeli, threshold modeli de önemli görülmektedir. Evet, SSI ve NOSC'un bu noktada ilişkisi önemli. Farklı aşamalardan geçiyor çünkü. Yansıtıcı yargılamadan bahsedilmesi gerekiyor ve daha sofistike düşüncelerden bahsedilmesi gerekiyor. Her ikisi de epistemolojik bir kavramsallaştırmaya ve bilginin kanıtlanabilirliğiyle ilgili bir sürece sahip. Aynı zamanda her ikisi de verilerin ve kanıtların odağında gelişen iki bakış açısı, iki felsefe ve her ikisi de bilginin doğasının önemini vurgulayarak öne çıkıyor ve tekrar değerlendirmeye de her ikisinin açık olarak durması, tekrar değerlendirmeye olanak tanıyabilir olması gerekmektedir. ZEIDLER, Professor ZEIDLER, sorry, it's over to you.
Thanks. I'm sure you're doing an awesome job. I know how difficult it might be to try to summarize so much and somebody else's work at the same time. So I'm sure you're doing an awesome job. So I
have a very much
of research. You're welcome. Little chunk of research to present, and then I'm going to take you on that kind of fun tour that I promised about. And so I'm going to look a little bit more at SSI in practice, research and student immersion. We've worked with little kids and college-age students as well. I'm going to first focus on place-based SSI education. And place-based education simply means something that's usually not inside the classroom. It might be outside the classroom in a schoolyard, might be in a park. In this case, this is at Yellowstone National Park, which is a large park in the United States, located where you see the circle here, and it connects to 3 different states. It's a huge area, and we took college students to this area for an immersive SSI event. The research that stems from covers 3 different years or 4 different years. And so there are different studies that you can find. I can present you with, if you like, on students' emotive reasoning through place-based environmental socio-scientific issue education. So in this particular course, it was a 6-week course, and it had a pre-departure coursework for 3 days, and then the immersive academic experience in the greater Yellowstone area. That's the national park, where students spent 10 days in a park, and then a post experience for coursework in 30 days. And in this, we were looking at the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Park, which is a very controversial issue because of the damage that the wolves can cause with cattle ranchers, people that farm and raise cattle, cows and sheep and that sort of thing. And the important part here is that students were given many opportunities to engage with different stakeholders, both formally. I'll share what those are in just a few minutes. So there were many SSI themes throughout the course. We tried to scaffold and build on a lot of the nuances of what we were finding out in this park. Again, through serendipity, there were a lot of surprising events that took place. We tried to build on those events. We tried to model for students how to question different stakeholders and have ample time for many group reflections, discussions, discourse, where we would probe for misconceptions and try to create dissonance, cognitive dissonance and moral dissonance in the students. And we try to get students to do different types of journals and community meetings where they need to assume the identity of different stakeholders. This is much too much to try to go through line by line. I'm just showing you the big picture here, and I'll show it to you in another form. The kinds of reasoning taking place, and we try to operationalize it, ranged from before the experiment, before the investigation, from apathy, just not caring about things, to a type of passive care or moderated concern, in which students had a concern about what was going on in the park, but they didn't really feel like they were in a position to help. They would say it might be somebody else's problem. They diffuse responsibility. And then at the higher levels, we can create dissonance where they would begin to feel a real sense of compassion and anger, and even at the best, righteous indignation, a visceral emotive response toward people and nature who suffered due to perceived inequities and injustices. Now, you remember back when I was arrested in high school, I experienced this sense of righteous indignation too, where I wanted to do something to help people that I thought were being treated unfairly. And I think that's where this kind of comes in through serendipity. It was such a surprise in our research to see this happen. So again, this is much too detailed to go through, but I wanted to show you that when you read our actual research, we present a kind of hierarchy of individuals and the different kinds of orientations, these socio-scientific orientations they may take, depending upon what they experience, who they're exposed to, or who they discuss things with. And again, at the highest level here, the sense of righteous indignation, where they feel a sense of compassion. And so we're trying to evoke emotive and rationalistic and intuitive reasoning on students' epistemic structures. And again, I realize this is too much information. I'm just trying to give you a sense of some of the most current research. And this one got published in just a few months ago, actually within a month ago. And what we did in this too was to take qualitative research and we imposed a quantitative structure so you can analyze data both qualitatively and quantitatively on it. And this is much too much to read right now, and there's a lot of text that would go in all these boxes, but I'm trying to simplify it. And just to have you look at, for example, a lower level one, and this is for the exemplar perspective taking. So I'll back up for a second. There are different socio-scientific orientations, and they include, that we've identified so far, perspective taking, sustainable development, moral and ethical sensitivity, empathy, feelings of responsibility, willingness to act, and scientific evidence. So we've created, for each one of those 7 perspectives or 7 SSI orientations, we've created these detailed operational definitions, qualitative understandings of these different levels, and operationalize them so we can quantitatively identify these different levels. So when you start with students who say, for example, I'm not really familiar with this issue, it's hard for me to sympathize with something I've never encountered, there would be a lack of awareness and a rejection of other people's perspectives, for example. There's other descriptors we have, but it's too much to put here right now. But if they made some reference to an SSI context, we would score as a 1.5. And this goes on and on. And if I move to the higher levels, I've purposely left off all the text, there's too much here. But let me go to the highest level of perspective taking. And this one, a student would score a number 5. The operational description is that the student consistently and explicitly is able to state how or why other people's perspectives are considered in their arguments, and they can demonstrate a type of emic to etic shift, understanding from the outsider to insider perspective, and explain how others' perspectives can be developed and taken into account in their arguments. And I just highlighted, some of the key exemplar, higher level of perspective taking. And without reading it all, I'll just read the last one. For example, this student, by the end of the course, by the end of the immersive experience, says, by listening to many different stakeholders' views, like the wolf issue, instead of just listening to the biologists say, this is the population, this is the data and how it's used to be, then listening to the ranchers, the farmers, the outfitters, those are people that take you on different nature experiences, nature walks. They all have different perspectives. It's hard to have one perspective when you are hearing personal accounts of the way all these different people are affected. The community council that we focused in, and we were forced to take a stance, whether we believe it or not, made us think and within ourselves and think about what we've learned. So you can go on, but basically you see that this person is able to consistently and explicitly give many examples of how he can begin to take other people's perspectives, have those emic to etic shifts. So this is what some of the research we've been working on most recently is showing us. And the really neat thing for us is to find that when you look at the black, which is the pre-SSI instruction, and the lines that are post-instruction, this is post-immersion experience, this is now 6 weeks, 7 weeks later after the course, that we can see this progression of where they begin to have more compassion, feel more guilt, more righteous indignation. And this is for anthropomorphic or people-centered types of empathy, the empathy we feel for people. Now, it's kind of one thing, it's easy enough to feel empathy for people. What's really neat is that we find that there are ecocentric empathy shifts with respect to nature-centered empathy. It's hard to get kids to really care about the environment. It's one thing to care about a person or some people, but it's hard to care about an environment, a place. But we're able to show in the research that the beginnings of this post-instruction, where these higher levels are becoming more commonplace in their responses to our questions. So that was kind of really neat for us to see that there are both anthropocentric and ecocentric increases in students' empathetic experiences. And I will pause one last time now.
ZEIDLER. Evet, bu sürecin şekillenmesinde aktif bir projeden bahsetmemiz gerekiyor. Bu proje daha çok mekan temelli öğrenmeden kastettiğimiz şey sınıfın içinde olmayan ama sınıfın dışında olan bir öğrenme öğretme sürecinden bahsediyoruz. National Park, Amerika'da çok önemli bir merkezde. Bu merkez üzerinden yürütülen bir projeyle bu felsefe daha da somutlaştı. Parkın duvarları civardaki çiftçilere ve hayvanlarına zarar vermesiyle ilgili bir mesele vardı. Bununla ilgili aktif olarak bu projeyi başlattık. Tabii ki çok fazla detay var. Sadece bu fikri kafalarınızda oluşturmaya çalışıyorum. Bu proje kapsamı 6 haftalık bir süreçti ve ilk 3 gününde oraya ulaşmadan, henüz gidilmeden yapılan bir eğitim süreciydi. 10 günlük süreç alan araştırması ve alanın deneyimlendiği bir süreç götürüldü. 30 günlük bir süreçte bu eğitim öğretim süreci deneyimlendikten sonra devam eden bir süreçti. Tabii ki en önemli şey öğrencilere resmi olarak ya da gayri resmi olarak tüm paydaşlarla iletişim kurma imkanı tanındı. SSI sosyobilimsel yöntem tüm kurs boyunca, tüm ders boyunca, proje boyunca uygulandı ve belirli sunumlar gerçekleştirildi. Özellikle bazı uyumsuzluklara dikkat çekmek için, özellikle grupların yansıtıcı tartışmaları yapıldı her deneyimden sonra. Özellikle yanlış anlaşılmalar ya da dediğim gibi çeldirici ya da uyumsuzluk yaratan şeylerin yaratılması ya da duygusal tepkilerle ilgili öğrencilerden yansıtıcı düşünce beyan etmeleri istendi. Aynı zamanda öğrencilerin paydaşların pozisyonlarıyla ilgili, konumlarıyla ilgili de yani nasıl algıladıkları, öğrencilerin nasıl algıladıkları ile ilgili deneyimler de proje kapsamına alındı. Evet, süreç genel olarak şu şekilde işliyor aslında. Professor ZEIDLER, can you go to slide 41, please?
Sure.
Thank you very much. Süreç aslında genel olarak bu şekilde işliyor. Öğrencilerin aslında sosyobilimsel konularla ilgili çok da tutum sergilemedikleri düşünülürse genellikle bu tür konulara eğilmedikleri gözlemlenmiş. Daha sonra diğerleriyle ilgili, diğer insanların duygularıyla ilgili ki bu projede bunlar çiftçilerdi, onların yaşadıkları sorunlara kayıtsız kalıp kalmadıklarıyla ilgili düşünceleri sorulduğunda çok fazla duygu barındırmadıkları da gözlemlendi. Ama daha sonra yavaş yavaş öğrenciler duygusal olarak bu duruma katıldılar ve duygusal bir farklılaşma yoluna gittiler. Ve süreci her deneyimlediklerinde bununla ilgili tartışmalar yaptıklarında, bununla ilgili paydaşlarla görüştüklerinde kısacası o sorunu yaşayan insanların yerine kendilerini koyduklarında bu konuda daha da fazla bilinçlendikleri görüldü. Can you go to slide 44, Professor ZEIDLER, please? Evet, bu slide'da aslında sonuç olarak SSI uygulamalarının verimliliği ile ilgili bazı özetlemeler yapılıyor. Özellikle yargılamalarla ilgili siyah olan bar uygulama öncesinde, ders öncesinde diğer çizgili varlık oranlarının ne kadar yüksek olduğunu gösteriyor. Özellikle deneyim noktasında ya da yargılama noktasında sorumluluk alma ya da hoşgörü gibi durumlarda özellikle farklılaşmaların olduğu dikkat çekici. Professor Zeidler, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I know there was a lot, and I promised you we'll have some fun now. I don't expect you to summarize everything I'm about to go through, because I'm going to whip through very quickly a lot of pictures of students engaging in different forms of immersive academic SSI type experiences. So I'll start this off again with telling you about the past study and show you some pictures from that. And I had mentioned that in the past study that you just reviewed, it took place in Yellowstone National Park. It's a large area. It's about 80,000 square kilometers. So you know that's a large area. And in this park, it's quite beautiful in the middle of the United States. It's a lot of wilderness, a lot of wildlife. It's and these are all pictures that I took when I was out there with the students. There's a lot of geothermic activity, volcano activity going on throughout the park too. So it's very dynamic, very interesting place with different habitats, different ecosystems. And throughout, there are little small towns that are nestled and placed in between all this wilderness area. And in this, you get to interact with a lot of local people. It's not unusual as you drive through the park to be able to be faced with big buffalo or bison walking down the street. There are thousands and thousands of them. And remember, the SSI issue was about the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park. This is one of the wolves I took with a telephoto lens. They're beautiful animals. There's also grizzly bears who can be, very deadly, but live among the ecosystem too. So as students are visiting these very small towns, they're able to interact with different townspeople that had different points of view, and they can see the wildlife that are just living among the townspeople as well. And we took some hikes in the mountains with a naturalist, like a wildlife biologist, an ecologist, and we're able to see where there's evidence that would scratch their claws to sharpen them up on trees, and would also rub up against the trees. That's actually bear fur, where they were itching themselves. So bears will do what bears do, and they rub themselves on trees, and they can leave behind the fur that you can find on these hikes. So students are really immersed in this environment. Here are some more views that we found of where bears were clawing the trees to sharpen their claws. We find evidence of different life cycles of the bison, the buffalo, and we experienced the students who were college students are able to participate in some field experiences to help work some of the land in the short experience out there. On the left is my colleague, Ben Herman. So a lot of the publications I was referring to, I published with him. But you can see that not everybody loves to see the wolves. A lot of tourists love to see them, but wolves can impact the economy of the farmers and attacking the livestock. And it becomes very costly for some of these people too. So the students are intervening and talking, having these etic to emic shifts and perspectives. This is a wildlife who's tracking with radar the different wolves and the migration patterns. This is a color that they'll put around the wolf so they can track their movements and study them. They talk to some American Indians, indigenous peoples that have different views about how they treat the wolves and the respect for the wolves. This person was a naturalist, a wildlife ecologist that would take us on hikes and tours too. But some people like to hunt the wolves too, and that's their perspective. So students talked to all these different individuals, rangers, different types of park police, people who give tours, research scientists that are studying the migration of wolf patterns. But becomes a very rare, real event, where it's wildlife and life and death types of situations. And it's a very interesting perspective. But the last day out there in Yellowstone National Park, I mentioned that we had scaffolded how students should ask questions to all these different individuals. And the students would have a typical SSI kind of debate. The students had to assume the perspectives of the different individuals that they have interacted with for a whole week, the different ranchers, the farmers, Native American groups, the hunters, the wildlife biologists, and they had talked with local people that live in these towns. And so we had a great SSI community meeting type of debate where students needed to argue these different perspectives. So that's just a typical immersive event. Some other work that we've done in immersive academics and SSI and inquiry, I've done with another colleague, a former doc student named Mitch Ruzak. And here we are taking over a middle school. This was pre-epidemic, but the scenario for this was that a school town that the kids had built, this is their school town, they built a community, and they needed to think about what kinds of things you would have in a community, like a bookstore, an airport, a police force, a fire department, a school, and how this community would function. We came in on their last day and said that there was a outbreak, a bacteria outbreak, that things are safe, but we wanted to study how this might affect their community. So through this immersive scenario, we interacted with students to try to figure out how you would run a town and decisions you would make if they needed medical help, who would get the medical help first, if there are limited resources, how you would allocate those limited resources to different people. And we had this simulation where we infected their town with a type of bacteria. And what we really did was spread yogurt over some of their houses and left it in the Florida sun for 3 days. And yogurt does what yogurt will do when left in the sun for 3 days. It became colonized and took over some of these buildings. There wasn't anything that was going to hurt them, but we had this simulation of what would happen to a town that had a type of pandemic. This is, again, pre-COVID. So the students became very immersed in studying this. We would do a lot of lessons with students that were inquiry lessons. So this is both, outside in place-based, field experiences. We'd go back to the classroom and do different types of inquiry experiences. This was a lesson on how disease can spread from one person to another person, for example. And you may have done something like this in your biology classes, but the fact that it's contextualized in this outbreak of a school made it really a lot more immersive and engage the students. So these are just some pictures I'm going to fly through. And this student began on his own volition to take samples from door handles, and they decided on their own to take samples from the bathroom. And it was surprising that there was more bacteria they were able to grow in these different plates and cultures, that door handles had more bacteria than the bathrooms did. So that was interesting to find out. And we never directed them to find that out. This is what they came up with on their own. They decided what to investigate. Another one that we do with smaller kids is we impact a meteor. Again, this is an immersive event, a simulation that has hit their school. So we actually come in with a big tractor and dig a big hole. We suit up like people from NASA, the space agency, and the students come out and on a Monday morning to find that this phenomena has taken place. And they're all full of questions. We never tell them that it's definitely a meteor. We say that it's a meteor-like, thing, but we want to look to see, how is this thing similar to rocks on Earth? How is it different? How do you think it got here? How can we study it? And so you can see we're dressed up for the part. There's a lot of acting that goes into this. But the students come out and they begin taking different types of notes. And it's a type of controlled chaos. I did this about 3 weeks ago at a school here in Florida. And we had probably 1,200, that's 1,200 students that we interacted with throughout the week. And they would carry a lot of these ideas back to their classroom and investigate them further. So for example, if you were doing a typical science lesson on rocks and minerals, and you do your streak test and color test, and you could do that in the classroom, and it's probably going to be the same kind of boring thing. But the fact that we would say that, oh, we found these different types of minerals out here at the site, and because there was kind of this immersive event, now it takes on more meaning and more importance to the students, and they really get involved with exploring the different properties of rocks and minerals that they would have done in their normal science curriculum, but now it's a big contextualized event out here. They decide what types of measurements they would make. They did some research on their own. They found out that some meteorites that make it to Earth are magnetic. So they were testing to see if this is magnetic with little magnets here. So again, through their own serendipity, they begin to find other things outside. They found a little life form by the meteor impact site, and they began to study the life cycle of inchworms and butterflies and things. We didn't plan for that. Again, serendipity. Then they came back to the classrooms and they decided to create different types of habitats based on this immersive scenario. This, again, was about 3 weeks ago, so you can see we're still wearing masks in the classrooms and when they're outside. So some pictures when students don't have masks were a year ago, before the pandemic. Pictures that you see with the students with the masks on, that's very recently, within the last couple of months. So we're working with students, they're interacting. We do another type one, which is an archaeological dig, and we come to the school and we just basically dig a big hole and we map and grid things out. And the hole becomes a metaphorical black hole because you can dump any content into that hole. So we can make connections to social studies, to language arts, to music, to literature, and to science, of course. Because in this hole, maybe we find old remnants of Calusa Indians, American Indians, artifacts, and we can study to see how the artifacts got there, who lived there before Americans lived here. We might find Spanish trade routes of how Spanish came and in Florida began to organize trade routes. So it becomes this very kind of interesting, engaging scenario that lasts for a whole week in a school. We were looking at the effects of DDT on farmland because this used to, where the school was, used to be a farm. And sometimes we have, go back into the media center in the library. We talk to the kids individually in small groups and then let them back out in the field to conduct their own research. So again, we still consider this place-based education because while some of it takes place in the classroom, a lot of it is out in the field. This is just some different schools who've done this numerous times where kids are coming out and making their own measurements and asking probing questions. And we never say, this is real, it's not real. We ask them for their ideas of how does this look like rocks you might find on Earth? How does this look like things that could be from space? Here's an example where kids, the gym teacher, the gymnastics teacher came out and decided to do an impromptu lesson on measurement. And so we had the kids lay end to end to try to figure out how long this impact crater was. And then we had to convert that to basketball lengths. And then we had to convert that to meter lengths and feet and inches that they're familiar with too. So we're doing different types of measurement, textualized type of science learning that connects to different disciplines in English and language arts. And the kids would then, by the end of the week, have their own scientific congress, a scientific congress or conference, if you will. And they would present a lot of things they found throughout the week. And they would present their investigations in small groups. We would come as being the scientists from the university and look at their presentations and make comments about them. But again, serendipity. Some of the coolest things that would happen is when students would show up every day and they began to go home and dig up their parents' backyard and their lawns, and they would show us what they found because they would find fossils too. In Florida, we find all kinds of fossils of fossilized shark's teeth and dinosaur bones. So they started coming every day what they found, and they wanted to know what it was, and we helped them investigate what it was too. So this is that serendipity, where you don't expect, you're looking for one thing and you find another. And during their lunch break, students could usually go out to the playground and play, right, on a swing set or a slide. But most of the students came back to the impact site, and they wanted to make more notes and draw more observations. So again, they could have just played for their hour lunch break, but they chose to come back and learn more about science. And we asked this one girl, what are you drawing? And she said, I'm drawing a picture of myself. I'm a scientist. So that was really great to see, this developing a sense of scientific identity. And here are some kindergarten kids having how a meteor may have come back to Earth. And I think that little boy is going to grow up to be a nuclear physicist. He's explained to my partner how meteors go through space and crash on Earth. And again, you can just do simple types of measurement, but because it's contextualized in this big immersive academic scenario, it becomes much more exciting. This is another former doc student, Melanie, who's working with the kids with us too, and it becomes so much fun. We would do morning news every day in the school, and we would discuss what different findings we found from the day before, what different findings the kids have found. We would take kids' names so we could announce their names, and we'd say, oh, Johnny Smith happened to observe that XYZ. And Sarah Davis found this. And the kids would hear their names in the news and become very impressed that they were reported on the school news for their findings. This is my favorite picture. And not posed, but this little girl just decided to go find a little special place and write down her observations and begin her drawings too. I just love this picture. It's not set up, but it's someone that's really just reflecting and engaging. And if we can get kids at a small age like this to engage in science, I think we're doing a great thing. So that's some of the serendipity of SSI. It's a conceptual framework that favors and promotes an open mind through the exploration of perspectives and positions and orientations where moral and ethical issues intersect science. And that's the serendipity of SSI, that it's the enactment of a predisposition to wonder. I'm going to repeat that one more time. A predisposition to wonder. I think that's part of the ultimate goals of what we're trying to do in science, is to get kids who grow up to be college students, who grow up to be adults, to still wonder about the world. And so in high school, I was really terrible at language. It took me 4 years to learn 2 years of French. But I did find this, and the translation is that where observation is concerned, chance favors only the prepared mind. So some things you find that are delightful discoveries, they happen by chance, they're not planned, but to really take advantage of them, you need to have that kind of mindset to be curious and to want to explore. So I don't expect you to summarize all that. I just wanted to sort of end on showing you some examples of how students interact with SSI. And there's a lot more I can show you. I'd be here for hours and hours, though, if I did that. So hopefully that gave you a taste of some students at the college level and younger levels interacting in these place-based SSI immersive scenarios. And I'll pause at this point, and I'll be happy to answer questions that you might have. And I'll let you have the mic.
Thank you very much, Professor Zeidler, for this informative and fruitful presentation. Of course, there are some questions coming from the participants. Thank you for your valuable questions. One question comes from Esma Elbey.
Actually, sorry, excuse me. We didn't start the question and answer event now.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. I would like to thank once again to Mr. Dr. Dana Zeidler for this outstanding speech. And I would like to also thank to our audience for listening us. And sorry for the technical problem that we have experienced at the beginning of my speech. Sayın Doktor Dana Zeidler'a bir kez daha bu harika sunum için teşekkür ediyorum. Ve dinleyicilerimize de burada oldukları için çok çok teşekkür ediyorum. Başlangıçta yaşadığımız sesle alakalı teknik problemden dolayı bir kez daha affınıza sığınıyoruz. Ama sakınılan göze çok batar derler. Küçük bir aksilik yaşamış olduk hiç istemediğim halde. And Mr. Zeidler, I would like to let you know the statistics. There are 1,400 people here right now who are listening to you. It's a great number.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I wasn't
I hope
expecting.
I kept them all awake.
Actually, I was expecting a huge number of listeners, but not above the thousands. So there are 1,400 people right now. As I told you before, you are really important to us, to Turkish academic researchers, and your work is appreciated in Turkey. I can see numerous people in the chat box. They are saying hello, welcome, thanks for the speech, etc. I will read some of them, and thank you a lot. Şimdi ben Profesör Zeidler'a istatistiklerden kısaca bahsetmek istedim. Şu an 1400'e yakın dinleyicimiz bizlerle. Bu semineri Zoom üzerinden gerçekleştirmeme sebebimiz katılımcı sayısının çok olacağını düşünüyorduk ve Zoom'da biliyorsunuz sayı sınırlaması var. 100'ün 200'ün üzerine geçtiğinde bağlanamama gibi bir problem var. Böyle bir problem yaşamamak için bunu YouTube'dan canlı olarak yapalım dedik. Katılımcı sayımızın yüksek olacağını düşünüyorduk zaten ama şu anki istatistik bizi epeyce şaşırttı. 1400 kişi canlı olarak yayınımızı izledi bizlerle. Bize gelen geri dönütlerde de birçok hocamızın Türkiye'nin en doğusundan en batısına bizlerle olacağını bildirmişlerdi. Şu an sohbet kutusunda da bizlere merhaba diyen, Dana Zeidler'a bu seminer için teşekkür eden birçok konuğumuz var. Ben hepinize çok teşekkür ediyorum. İyi ki geldiniz, iyi ki buradasınız. Bu seminer sizlerle daha da anlamlı hale geldi. Teşekkür ediyorum bir kez daha. Şimdi çok fazla soru var, çok fazla hoş geldiniz mesajı var. Bunlardan bir kısmını aralardan vaktimizin yettiği kadarıyla değinmeye çalışacağız. Nilay sondan başa doğru gitmek istiyorum ben. Nilay Öztürk hocamızla başlayabiliriz. Buyurun Lütfi hocam. And now we are going to question and answer part, Mr. Zeidler. We have lots of questions, but we will ask some of them. And now the first question comes. Are you ready?
I think so.
Okay, here you are, Mr. Sarach.
Okay, the question comes from Nilay Öztürk. Thank you, Dr. Zeidler, for your speech. Great to see you again. My question to you is related to one of your papers, STEM education, a deficit framework for the 21st century, published in Cultural Studies of Science Education. In that paper, you criticize STEM education by focusing on silo effects and offer SSI as a socio-cultural response. Can you please elaborate your ideas about how can we achieve science teaching curriculum that is both integrated and enacted in socio-cultural contexts? By saying integrated, I mean integrated STEM curriculum.
What a great question. Thank you for that question. And so you're correct in that paper. That's been fairly widely cited. I was critical of STEM education as STEM education is typically envisioned and implemented, at least in the United States. And the problem with looking at things from a science, technology, environment, engineering, and math perspective is that, again, those are very siloed disciplines, and the STEM frameworks I've seen don't really do a good job of trying to integrate across that. But also, STEM as a whole, and I don't care if you call it STEAM or STEM, tends to leave off the sociocultural factors that I think are more important in learning and how kids think and reason and develop, and those emotional connections that kids have. So where STEM is important, it's important to learn and turn out engineers and scientists and mathematicians. I'm more concerned with the other 95% of the population that aren't going to be research engineers and chemists and mathematicians and technologists. but who need to still make everyday decisions based on scientific information that affect their lives and affect the world around them. So in offering SSI as a way to overlay on STEM education, I think it can provide the sociocultural kinds of experiences that I advocate for. And by way of example, in a lot of the pictures that I just showed you of kids interacting in this manner, we are able to have transdisciplinary connections. And I would need a whole lot more time to give you all the kinds of examples where we had kids, for example, in one of the archaeological digs that we found things that dated back, for example, that we put there from the 1940s, World War II, and farm implements and farm tools. And that led into the development of DDT and pesticides. And then we had students, for example, in the language arts English classes begin to write essays on what it was like to live in the 1940s in Florida. What was life like? You didn't have cell phones to talk to one another. You didn't have computer games. What would you play? What would you play for a game if you were a kid who was 12 years old and living in Florida then? What was World War II like for them? And so we moved from language arts to learn about history. I found a newspaper from the graduating class of 1940 of kids from Sarasota High School. Sarasota is a town next to Tampa where I live. And in that, there are pictures of high school graduates, their typical graduation picture. But most of those kids, those boys, were going off to fight World War II. And they can see how young they were. And they began to explore, so what happened to these people? Did they come back? Did they survive World War II? What was World War II about? What kind of things were entertaining? So we pulled out old records, and kids had never seen what a record looks like before. That you play on a phonograph. They only have things that are on their cell phones to listen to. So we began to look at technology and how technology has evolved over time. So the point is that we were able to make English literature connections, social studies connections, language arts connections. The music teacher would come in and develop a song for kids to discuss what went on during that week. The art teacher had kids drawing different kinds of discoveries. So the whole idea of the SSI curriculum is that it's amenable to have cross-disciplinary connections. And it's not just limited to science and technology and math and engineering. It's open to have these social-cultural dynamics that cut across all disciplines. And I think that kind of holistic approach to learning is the most engaging and the most productive kind of approach to learning. So I hope that answers your question to some extent. I wish we had all day to talk about that.
Thank you very much, Professor Zeidler. Another question comes from Ramazan Soğukpınar. My question will be, Dr. Zeidler, in the current pandemic period, most of the middle school students cannot receive face-to-face education. How can we effectively process SSI in a distance learning?
Yeah, another great question. This has put a real wrinkle in what we do. So we didn't do a lot of these immersive scenarios where we take over a whole school for a large part of this pandemic year. The pictures I showed you were kids wearing masks. Those schools had opened up in the last 3 or 4 months, where kids began coming back to school, but with reduced classes and wearing the masks. So we were able to go in and do this sort of thing. If you were teaching completely online, virtually, which I think is the question, what could you do? So I think you're much more limited, but I would go back and do what I would do in my regular classroom, and I would have different moral dilemmas that we would present to the class. So, engaging and fun. But a lot of our earlier work was done with hypothetical dilemmas. So we would present students with a scenario, and I don't know how it works in where you are, but I can have a whole class of 30 students online at the same time, and I can break them into smaller groups, into breakout groups, and they can discuss these in smaller groups. They can find evidence to support a point of view on a topic, come back and report on that. And then I would do some traditional teaching to explain more about the science behind the topic, and then send them back off into small groups and research more, and then can still culminate in a type of debate. So I have done this on a university level with students where they're engaged in that kind of discourse. So I think it can be done. Of course, it's more fun to be there in person, but the way I would structure a classroom using hypothetical dilemmas that are real dilemmas, but they're taking place in your classroom, I can easily still adapt that to learning online and trying to engage kids in the same way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Saraj, let me give some information to Ramazan. The previous question come from Nina Öztürk. I know her from Middle East Technical University. His English is very well, so I thought she can understand the answer. But now the Ramazan is my PhD student, and I would like to briefly mention about Dr. Daniel ZEIDLER'ın answer. Ramazan soruna geldiğimizde pandemi döneminde özellikle sosyobilimsel konuları nasıl sınıfımıza yansıtabiliriz diye sormuştum. Dr. Daniel ZEIDLER kısaca şöyle bahsetti. Fotoğraflarda da paylaştığım gibi orada maskeli öğrencilerin fotoğraflarını görmüşsündür. O fotoğraflar 3 ay önceki çalışmamızdan çekilmiş fotoğraflar. Pandemi döneminde biz de sosyobilimsel konularla ilgili çalışmalar yürütmeye devam ediyoruz. Normal sınıfımızda yaptığımız gibi yine ikilemli konular üzerine kötü yapılandırılmış ill structured problemler dediğimiz problemleri sınıfa getirerek çalışmalarımıza devam ediyoruz. Hypothetical yani hipotez yani senaryolarla da bu sosyobilimsel konuları sınıfında yürütmeye devam edebilirsin. Çok fazla problem olacağını düşünmüyorum dedi benim anlayabildiğim kadarıyla. Şimdi diğer soruya geçebiliriz Lütfü Hocam.
Professor ZEIDLER, another question comes from Esma. Good evening, Mr. Professor. My question is that,
Lütfü Hocam.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I can too.
Okay, the question comes from Esmail Bey. Good evening, Mr. Professor. My question is that as a science pre-service teacher, I most of the time am reluctant to invite my students towards socio-scientific topics because I'm always curious and I'm afraid of that the discussion will go to a position that I cannot control. So I do. How should I direct and guide my students?
Good questions. I'm jotting notes as you ask the question. So we've recently published several articles, like in the last on elementary pre-service science teachers and some of the difficulties they have and how to overcome that with teaching science to very young children, like kindergarten, first, second, third grade. So we have some very recent research in that area. To answer your question first more directly, I don't think you need to control the position of the students. You need to have in mind the content you still want to study. I think it's fine for students to come up with different perspectives, and even ones that you didn't anticipate. The important thing is that they understand first that there's a sense of democracy in this. There's a sense of respect, and we need to value other people's ideas and listen to them. And there's a certain class culture where students can trust you, and you trust your students as well too. So I don't dictate the positions my students should end up with. Fine for them to have different positions, even if I don't agree with them. I don't tell them my position, but I'm trying to get them to be aware of different points of view. I don't know what grade we're looking at, but as the students get older, not every position is equally valid, right? Some are better thought out, some have better internal logic, some are backed by more evidence, some are backed by better evidence too. So you can't begin to dissect different arguments and look to see which arguments seem to be more supportive. Sometimes when we have a community meeting, I'll have a group of students that are sort of like judges who decide what group has the best argument. And we develop rubrics together with the students to decide, well, what kind of things would be important to you to make a determination of who wins the argument or who will we support. And so sometimes we have this kind of courtroom setting where several students, like 4 or 5 students, act as the judges, and will listen to the different arguments and decide which one may win and for what reason, what supporting evidence. So I guess, I think it takes time to just to feel comfortable with these types of skills and not getting students to one certain position, but getting them to listen to one another and go through this process of argumentation. It's something that has to be practiced, and you need to try it a few times. But it's a great question, and I don't have like one answer that will do it for you. But allow students to go.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zeidler. Bağlantı kötü olduğu için çok fazla dinleme şansı yakalayamadım ama genel hatlarıyla ne demek istediğini anladım. Lütfü hocam, isterseniz siz bahsedin ya da ben bahsedeyim.
Tabii hocam. Siz de lütfen eksiğim olursa tamamlayın.
Tabii,
öncelikle çok güzel bir soru. Bununla ilgili elementary seviyede, ilkokul seviyesinde ve okul öncesi öğrencilerin de katıldığı ve fen bilgisi öğretmenlerinin olduğu bir çalışma yürüttük. Küçük yaşta çocuklar vardı. Bu konuyla ilgili direkt bir yanıt vermem gerekirse sınırlandırmamalıyız. Öğrencileri kesinlikle sınırlandırmamalıyız. Farklı katılmadıkları düşünceleri olsa da bu düşüncelere saygı duyup demokrasi ortamını oluşturarak farklı düşüncelere sahip olabileceklerini, bu durumu anlamalılar. Bu noktada saygı çok önemli. Hangisinin daha iyi olduğunu söylememeliyiz. Çünkü toplum içerisinde farklı gruplar var ve kendilerini farklı şekillerde savunabiliyorlar. Bence bu noktada kaygılanmamalısınız.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum Lütfü Saraç hocamıza, aynı zamanda Dana Zeidler'a. Mr. Zeidler, we have lots of questions and lots of welcome messages, but I know we don't have much time. I would like to ask you whether we have time for 1 or 2 questions, or let me end.
We can do 1 or 2 more. I do have another meeting that's taking place right now, but I can be late for it.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Saraç, we can take 1 or 2 questions.
Okay. Another question comes from Professor Zeidler, Eda Sansar. Hello, Dr. Zeidler and Dr. Dilek Hocam. My question is that every educator has got his or her own ideas and her or his own values. So while we are teaching socio-scientific issues or subjects, how can you direct these ideas and values?
Yeah, another great question. I think they're asking if you have your own values and your own beliefs about a topic,
Exactly.
How much should you share that with the students? And again, I always try to be a little mysterious. I don't want to show my cards to the students. I don't want to show my hand. What I tell them I value is that I value their own thinking. I value good evidence. I value respect and courtesy, and I value inquiry. And so I don't tell them that this is my position on an issue. What I do value is how we arrive at a type of consensus, or how we arrive at different points of view in the classroom. So I try to keep as much as possible my own values out of it. Now, to the extent that I might unconsciously communicate something to students, perhaps. I think we probably all do that to a certain extent because we're only human. But I try to make a concerted effort. I don't want them to align their beliefs with mine. I want them to come together and formulate their own type of sensibility, to a situation. And what I usually find is that because in a classroom is fairly heterogeneous, it usually does require people to come together and take these different beliefs that occur in a classroom and figure out some type of compromise or how to work together with it. So I try to stay out of the mix as much as possible. But I do value good reasoning and good logic and compassion and care. And that's what I try to communicate to them.
Thank you. Lütfü Hocam, bir önceki soruda sorunun Türkçesini söylemeyi unuttuk, çevirmeyi unuttuk. Burada ben hemen soruyu Türkçe'ye çevireyim. Burada Eda Sansar hocamızdan çok güzel bir soru geldi. Diyor ki, sosyobilimsel konuları sınıfımıza getirdiğimizde, bunlar ikilemli konular tabii ki ve bazı durumlarda bizim kendi ön yargılarımız oluyor öğretmen olarak ya da işte bilim insanı olarak. Bu ön yargılarımızı çocuklara nasıl yansıtmadan sosyobilimsel konuları tartışabiliriz ya da yansıtmamak ne kadar mümkün? Bunu sordu. Evet, cevabı alabiliriz Lütfü Hocam.
Evet, bu da başka güzel bir soru. Burada değer verdiğimiz, öğrencilerde öğrendirdiğimiz şeyler çok önemli. Örneğin ben öğrencilerin diğer farklı görüşlere ne kadar saygılı olarak bir konum belirlediğini, nasıl tartışabildiğini, kendini kanıtlarla nasıl savunabildiğini, buna benzer şeylere değer veriyorum ya da o anlamda görüş bildiriyorum. Bu nedenle benim düşüncelerimle aynı olmasına da gerek yok. Böyle bir beklenti içinde de olmamız gerekmiyor. Çünkü sınıf ortamı toplumda olduğu gibi heterojen bir ortam. Bununla ilgili kaygı duyulmamalıdır der Profesör ZEIDLER.
Evet.
Diğer soruya geçelim mi hocam?
Teşekkür ediyorum. Çok fazla soru var. Çok fazla güzel mesajlar aldık. Son bir soru daha soralım istiyorum. Evet. Bakayım şöyle bir hızlıca soruların içerisine. Teşekkür mesajları var. Ben de bütün dinleyicilerimize teşekkür ediyorum. Evet, yeni eklenen çok bir soru yok. Sizdeki soruların haricinde.
Esra Hoca'nın bir
olur. Onu da
var.
son kez soralım. Esra Hoca'nın sorusuyla tamamlayalım. Çok fazla yeni bir soru göremedim ben. Kaçırdıklarım varsa, ki var sanırım birkaç tane, kendilerinden özür diliyorum. Zamanı epey bir açtık. 1 saatlik bir webinar yapmayı planlıyorduk ama şu an neredeyse 2 saati tamamlıyoruz. Lütfen kusurumuza bakmayın sorularını iletemediğim hocalarım. Belki özelden mailleşiriz. Ben de tekrar ZEIDLER'a aktarabilirim. Teşekkürler. ZEIDLER, we have lots of questions, lots of welcome messages, but I know we don't have time. So this is your last question. Then you can go.
Evet, son sorumuz Esra Eğrikaya hocamızın sorusu. İlkokul çocuklarının sosyobilimsel konularla ilgili yeterli bilgiye sahip olmaması etkinlik yapmamı engeller mi? Yaratıcı drama yöntemiyle bu durumu aşabilir miyim demiş. Professor ZEIDLER, my question is that this question comes from Esra Erikaya. My question is that the fact that the primary school students do not have enough knowledge and information about social sciences or socio-scientific issues, does it affect my in-class activities? And can I solve this problem with creative drama method?
Wow, another great question. So the answer is yes, is the short answer. We have written a paper, Sammy Khan and myself, that discusses to some extent the use of drama in SSI. But the role-playing kinds of activities is a great way for students to assume different perspectives and begin to learn what information may have influenced. So you're right, primary students don't have a lot of background knowledge and content knowledge, but it's through these academic immersive experiences that they will begin to learn that knowledge. So the students you see in those pictures didn't have a lot of background knowledge on meteors, on rocks, on the rock cycle, on life cycle, but it's through our SSI event that they began to learn that. But going back to the use of drama, that is there are other disciplines like in English and language arts education that have used that very well. And what we've done is we've sort of borrowed from those disciplines and used them in SSI. And so, you know, the idea of drama and role playing becomes a very salient and important feature and tool that a teacher can use to immerse students in SSI, and not just primary students, but students of all levels we've done this with. But we have written specifically on that topic before. It's a piece in the Journal of Science Teacher Education. Again, if you'd like to share my email with students and people that are watching this, other researchers, and I promise I'll try to answer as many questions as I can, if possible, and have an article that I think might align with what your question is. I'd be happy to send that to you as well, or provide you with my Vita, and you can pick and choose the things you might be interested in, and I can try to get that to you. So I appreciate the opportunity to discuss SSI with all of you, and really pleased by how many people responded and wanted to listen at kind of a late hour for you to this talk.
We thank you very much, Mr. Zeidler. I would like to thank how many people? 1,511 people who are listening us right now. Thank you very much. And değerli hocamız Deniz Zeidler'a teşekkür ediyorum ve şu an bizi dinleyen 1511 kişiye de teşekkürlerimi sunuyorum. Çok güzel bir webinar oldu. Sorularınızla da webinarımızı zenginleştirdiniz. Bir kez daha teşekkür ediyorum bunun için. Ve Deniz Zeidler'ın son sözleri şuydu: sorularını aktaramadığımız hocalarımız için e-mail adresimi paylaşabilirsiniz dedi. zeidler@usf.edu e-mail adresi. Kendisine mail atabileceğinizi, sorularınız varsa spesifik onları cevaplandırabileceğini söyledi. Ve CV'sini de sizinle paylaşabileceğini, içinde ilgilendiğiniz bir makale olursa o makaleyi de sizinle paylaşabileceğini söyledi. Zeidler hocamız her zamanki gibiydi. Olabildiğince kıymetli açıklamalar yaptı bize. Kendisine sonsuz teşekkürlerimi iletiyorum. Dinleyicilerimize de sonsuz teşekkürlerimi iletiyorum. These are my last words, Dana Zeidler. I thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you to all of you, and for participating in this, for translating, for the technology to set up, and I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. I wish you all a great night, and good luck with your research and academics. You take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.